Hi guys, welcome to the channel. This is how I sow seeds like a pro, and there are various reasons behind this. One being that when I used to work selling greenhouses and stuff like that, we had only one heated greenhouse for the whole show site. It was about 3,500 square feet for the show site, and we had to literally be like a conveyor belt. So we had a 12 by 8 Victorian greenhouse that was heated. None of the other greenhouses were heated. We had 22 on the show site, all in all, but only one working greenhouse, proper working greenhouse heated. And it wasn't heated to stupendous temperatures. It was only heated to about 18 degrees, 16 to 18 degrees. So we had to gauge it with the weather as well. Now, the reason I adapted, I wouldn't say learned, I would say adapted the way, because obviously basic knowledge for sowing seeds, very, very simple. You just read the seed packet, right? But we had to adapt to a way that was very cheap, being the major one, because there was only two of us running the whole show site and we didn't get any funding from higher up the chart. Typical company, right? If we wanted to do it, we had to do it ourselves. So that was compost, seeds, plants, pots, which was very easy really, because we also sold sheds. So when the shed people come in, we asked for all the spares of the wood and stuff like that, so we could make our own pots and renew them on a 2-3 yearly basis. So everything was about cutting costs, keeping it cheap, but getting the most out of it. So I have been sort of adaptive in that sense, because here, although I don't work there anymore, I'm adapting to my wall out the front. Very similar situation. I've got 140 odd pots out there. We had 110, 120 at the show site, although they were a lot bigger, like streamlined, big, almost like window boxes on steroids. My pots out the front are all circular, or, smaller, much smaller. So I've had to adapt, having only a 10 by 6 polytunnel and a 6 by 8 polytunnel. And we had a 12 by 8 Victorian greenhouse. So a bit of a step down, if you like, for me. So I've got to do the wall. Back in work, I had to do the show site. So that's where that comes in, all of that. So I've adapted the strategy, keep it cheap, keep it quick. Bear in mind, I had to serve people as well at the show site. So here I don't have to serve, but it allows me and buys me time to do other things during the day, and plan the next stage of what I'm going to do. So it's very, very similar to the workings on the show site. So keep it as small as possible, but cram as much in as possible and have it on a conveyor belt. These little tubs behind me are how I do it here on a smaller scale. So as you can see, I literally cram everything into these little Chinese tubs, Chinese takeaway tubs. They're food grade quality, so good sterile. You're starting off very clean, very cheap to buy, and as you can see, they do what they're supposed to do. I take the tub, I burn holes in the bottom of it. I then put a bit of compost, a little bit of compost in it. That's all's needed. And then my seeds, and then vermiculite on top to keep the moisture in. Because I'm using the house and we're set between 16 and 20 degrees in the house, that's adequate to bring any seedling up. If they require a little bit hotter, I've got a propagator upstairs, which is also full. And generally most seeds will come up here, and I've got the grow lights over the top. So now these guys are up, they will go out into the polytunnel and sat on capillary matting. So I don't have to keep watering them every 5 minutes. They'll just draw up what they need through the holes on the bottom, and they can sit there and they can just grow away happy. Colder out there, so they will be slowed down somewhat, and that will buy me time. So what I'll do is, when these are going out today, because I don't want them getting too leggy. They're starting to. That's about the maximum I want them in here. They need to get out into the colder climate, and they need to start putting on their true leaves and stuff before I start potting them on. Now, I could put these on whenever. They've plenty of space in there. It just means pricking out's a little bit harder. These will then go into trays, cell trays of about, I reckon, 40 cell trays to keep my space down. Again, so 40 or so cell trays, and then they can sit there until they're ready to go on the wall. Now, we've just gotten into March now, so I'm looking end of April. So they can sit in there, I can feed them, I can water them, I can look after them in the little 40 cell trays. You'd be surprised how big the plants will get in them little 40 cell trays, the little plugs. But they will, as long as they're getting food, they will quite happily sit there until they're ready to be put out. And then once they're out, they will fly. They literally, day after day after day, you'll notice the difference in them flying once they get the roots down. So I do everything in these little trays, in these little things. Now everybody's screaming at me right now saying, oh, what about depths? What about this? What about that? Everything's the same. Keep it streamlined. There's a framework regarding this. And so here's an Nicotiana sylvestris. They've not popped up yet. I expect them to be a little bit slower than the Cosmos. Cosmos were up in 3 days. 3 days. I know, it's scary. And now I've got like 5 or 6 trays there of Cosmos. So what I'll do, you can see the layer of compost down here. And then I have all the compost layers the same. And then I will determine the depth of whichever seed you're sowing by the vermiculite. So the vermiculite dictates the depth. So I've got a thin layer of vermiculite over the Nicotiana because they're such small seeds. They need the light to get up through the vermiculite. So I'll keep it nice and fine on the surface. Now, things like dahlias or ipomea, morning glories, they'll go slightly deeper. So I'll have the vermiculite slightly deeper. And that'll keep the moisture in. It also, it protects the seedlings. So, and another thing I will always do is I've got this tray here, and I'll always bottom water, never top water, because I don't want that to be going green. The moisture comes up from the base, so it's not sitting on top and it's not creating green algae and what we call like a hard crust to prevent the seeds coming up through. So always bottom water. Always dictate the depth of your seed with the vermiculite, and it works, has done for me for 20 odd years. So don't fix what's not broken. All of these little seeds will start coming up. They can go out today. They're morning glory. I expect them to be a little bit long and leggy because they're climbers, and they come up with a vengeance. They were up in 3 days, same as the cosmos, and they're almost ready to be pricked out, to be fair. And again, these will possibly be potted up singularly, and then I will give them something like a bamboo cane to let them climb up. But that's 3 days. Morning glory, heavenly blue, 3 days in that method. And the house is no different temperatures. Other little seedlings I've got coming up. Gazania. This is all pretty much bedding, but then I have other things thrown in there, which I'll show you. But gazania, very, very fine layer of vermiculite on the top of that. Very fine layer, and the seeds just poke through. Even finer than that, I've got rudbeckia. Where's my rudbeckia? As you can see, fine layer. Rudbeckia is pushing up through that. Again, 3 days. It takes no time at all. Once you get fresh seed is key. Any of the older seeds, now here's one I designed earlier, shall we say. Here's some fresh seed of Dahlia Black Forest. Look at the spread on that. Fresh seed. This is last year's seed. Red skin. Look at the germination rate. 2, 4, 6 in there out of about 40 odd seedlings. They're going to be very sporadic. The seed's not fresh. Maybe I won't do those actually. But yeah, that's how I sow, pretty much like a pro. If you take this concept and upscale it to nursery level, no difference. They're going to do it. They're probably going to soil block everything, but that to me is just taking up too much space. But if you've got a 100-foot polytunnel or 5 of them in a row, you've got that space. But if they downscaled it to this, they're only going to be pricking out anyway. So what's the difference in pricking out this to pricking out? They do big seed trays. I'm doing smaller seed trays, but I'll have the same germination rates as they will. So yeah, these will go out, as I say, into the polytunnel. They'll get processed. They'll move from the capillary matting, get potted up into 20 cells or 40 cells, and then they'll sit on another bench in there with capillary matting, and until about the late April, early May, and then they're out on the wall, and they will grow quite happily out there. So that's the video of how I sow like a pro. So get some Chinese tubs, get some holes in the bottom, get some decent compost, and get going. All right, until the next one, see you soon.